After donating my kidney to save her life, my daughter stared me in the eyes and said, "You're still worthless." I am Lydia Thompson, 67 years old, a widow, and the mother of one daughter, Clarissa. For decades, I worked double shifts at the textile mill in the industrial part of town, sewing other people's dreams into fabric while mine unraveled thread by thread. My fingers bled onto white linen more times than I can count. When her father died in a construction accident 28 years ago, I was left with a 6-year-old girl, a mortgage I couldn't afford, and $18,000 in medical bills that crushed me like a vice. Every penny I earned after that went into Clarissa's future. I skipped meals so she could eat steak on Fridays. I walked 4 miles to work in snowstorms so she could have the car for school activities. I wore the same winter coat for 15 winters, the lining torn and stuffing exposed, just so she wouldn't feel less than the rich girls at Westbrook Academy, where I'd enrolled her using loans I'm still paying off today. I sold my wedding ring to pay for her college application fees. I took a third job cleaning offices at night, just to cover her sorority dues. When she graduated with honours, I stood in the back of the auditorium in my old navy dress, tears streaming down my face, believing every sacrifice had been worth it. And when her kidneys failed last year at just 34 years old, chronic disease they said, genetic they claimed, I never hesitated for even a heartbeat. The doctor sat me down in his sterile office that smelled of antiseptic and doom, looked me straight in the eyes, and told me with practiced concern, "Mrs. Thompson, at your age, this surgery will be extremely dangerous. You could lose your mobility. You could develop complications that would leave you dependent on dialysis yourself. Or worse, you might not survive the operation at all." But a mother doesn't calculate risk when her child's life hangs in the balance like a thread about to snap. A mother doesn't weigh probabilities when her baby is dying. I signed the papers with shaking hands, gave up one of my kidneys, the left one they took, and spent 4 agonizing months learning to walk upright again after the operation. The scar across my abdomen is thick and purple, a permanent reminder of the day I literally carved out a piece of myself to save her. I thought she would see my sacrifice. I thought she would finally look at me with the love I'd been starving for all these years. I thought wrong. Have you ever sacrificed everything for someone, only to be treated like you gave nothing? Drop a comment below. I need to know I'm not alone in this. The first escalation came only 3 weeks after the transplant surgery. My body was still healing, the incision still tender and angry-looking, when Clarissa invited me to a dinner party at her new husband's estate. His name was Preston Whitmore III, a venture capitalist with inherited wealth and the personality of a marble statue. They'd married 6 months before her diagnosis, and I'd paid for half the wedding despite not being asked about a single detail. The invitation came via text. Dinner party Saturday 7 p.m, try to look presentable. I arrived at their columned mansion in my best dress, the old navy one I'd sewn myself years ago, carefully mended at the seams. The fabric was soft from too many washes, but it was clean and modest. I thought that would be enough. The dining room was something out of a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a table that stretched impossibly long, lined with people in designer suits and dresses that cost more than my monthly pension. I recognized faces from society pages, CEOs, politicians, influencers with millions of followers. And there I was, a retired textile worker with calloused hands and a surgery scar hidden beneath bargain fabric. When I sat beside Clarissa, she glanced at me with eyes cold as January frost. Then she whispered, but loudly enough for the guests on both sides to hear perfectly, "Mother, couldn't you have worn something less cheap? This is embarrassing." Laughter rippled across the table like a stone thrown into still water. My heart sank into my stomach, where my missing kidney used to be. Heat flooded my face, but I swallowed the shame like bitter medicine and said nothing. After all, hadn't I just given her my flesh and blood? Surely this was just stress talking. Surely she didn't mean it. The dinner continued with course after course of food I couldn't pronounce. Somewhere between the duck confit and the chocolate soufflé, Preston stood and clinked his crystal glass with a silver fork. The tinkling sound silenced the room. "I want to make a toast," he announced, his voice booming with self-importance. "To my beautiful wife who has overcome so much this past year, my Clarissa, who fought through illness with grace and dignity, and to modern medicine, which gave her a second chance at life." Everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine too, waiting for him to mention me, waiting for Clarissa to stand and acknowledge the kidney that was keeping her alive. She stood instead and smiled at the crowd, her hand resting on Preston's arm. "My husband gave me the strength to survive. His love pulled me through the darkest days. I wouldn't be here without him." Not once did she mention my kidney. Not once did she look at me. I was invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of her new life. I set down my glass. The sound of it hitting the table was louder than I intended. A few heads turned. Clarissa shot me a look that could freeze blood. After dinner, as guests mingled with champagne and fake laughter, I approached her near the fireplace. "Clarissa, honey, I know you're still recovering, but that toast, I just thought maybe—" She cut me off with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mother, please don't make tonight about you. These people are important connections for Preston's business. Can you try not to embarrass me further?" The words hit like a slap, but I nodded, gathered my worn purse, and left without saying goodbye to anyone. On the drive home, I cried so hard I had to pull over twice. The scar on my abdomen throbbed like it knew it had been given in vain. Humiliation wasn't enough for my daughter. Apparently, erasing my existence from her success story wasn't sufficient payment for the organ I'd donated. No, she needed more. 1 month after that disastrous dinner party, Clarissa arrived at my small 2-bedroom house unannounced. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was in my garden trying to coax life from tomato plants that refused to thrive in the rocky soil. I heard her car before I saw it, a sleek black Mercedes that looked obscenely out of place in my working-class neighbourhood. She stepped out wearing a cream pantsuit and sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. But she wasn't alone. A man in a grey suit followed her, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed expensive lawyer. "Mother," Clarissa said without warmth, without even a greeting, "we need to talk inside." My stomach twisted with dread, but I led them into my tiny kitchen. The lawyer, his name was Bernard something, I barely caught it, sat at my formica table and opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency. He pulled out a stack of papers and slid them across the surface toward me. "Sign this," Clarissa said flatly, not even sitting down. I picked up the papers with soil-stained hands and began reading. The legal language was dense, deliberately confusing, but certain phrases jumped out like knives. Transfer of property ownership, relinquishment of title, irrevocable deed. They wanted my house, the only thing my late husband Marcus left me, the only place I'd ever called home. What is this?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. Clarissa sighed like I was a slow child struggling with simple math. She finally sat down across from me, removing her sunglasses to reveal eyes empty of anything resembling daughter love. "It's just practical, Mother. You're old. Your health is compromised now after the surgery. What if something happens to you? What if you fall or forget to pay bills or can't maintain this place anymore? It should be in my name now, for your own protection." "For my protection?" I repeated, disbelief making my voice shake. "Yes," she said with manufactured patience. "Preston and I have discussed this extensively. We believe it's the responsible thing to do. You'll still live here, of course. Nothing will change. It's just a legal formality." But everything in her tone told me she was lying. Everything in the lawyer's predatory eyes told me this was theft wrapped in concern. I need time to think about this," I said, setting the papers down. The lawyer leaned forward then, and his voice carried the weight of implied threat. "Mrs. Thompson, I should inform you that if you refuse to sign voluntarily, we have grounds to pursue alternative legal avenues. You've been on significant pain medication following your surgery, correct? Opioids can affect cognitive function and decision-making capacity. If necessary, we can file a petition with the court to have you declared mentally incompetent to manage your own affairs. The room tilted. My mouth went dry. You're threatening me? We're protecting you, Clarissa said coldly, whether you cooperate or not. They left the papers on my table. Before walking out, Clarissa paused at the door and looked back at me with something like pity mixed with contempt. Sign them by Friday, Mother, or we'll do this the hard way. The door closed. The Mercedes drove away. And I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at documents designed to make me homeless, wondering how the baby I'd nursed and raised and bled for had become this stranger who saw me as an obstacle to be removed. Has anyone ever used your own sacrifice against you? Made you feel like the bad guy for giving too much? Tell me your story below. I didn't sign the papers. Pride, stubbornness, or maybe just the last spark of self-respect I had left. Whatever it was, kept my pen away from that signature line. Friday came and went. I heard nothing from Clarissa, and for 3 blissful days I dared to hope she'd drop the whole terrible idea. Then the official court documents arrived. It was a Monday morning when the process server knocked on my door. A young man who looked uncomfortable handed me a manila envelope and asked me to sign for it. My hands trembled as I opened it right there on my front steps. Petition for determination of incapacity. The header screamed in bold letters. I had to read it 3 times before the words made sense. Clarissa had filed legal paperwork to have me declared mentally incompetent. The document listed reasons: advanced age, recent major surgery, prolonged use of prescription pain medication, observed confusion and memory difficulties, inability to maintain property, financial mismanagement. Every single reason was either exaggerated or an outright lie. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away. If the judge ruled in her favour, I would lose everything, not just my house, but control of my bank account, my pension, my medical decisions. Clarissa would become my legal guardian. I would be stripped of my autonomy, reduced to a dependent child in the eyes of the law. I called her immediately, my fingers fumbling with the phone buttons. She answered on the 4th ring. "Mother, I'm in the middle of something." "How could you do this?" My voice cracked. "How could you file this thing claiming I'm incompetent?" Her sigh was audible even through the phone. "I gave you a chance to do this the easy way. You refused, now we're doing it the legal way. It's for your own good whether you understand that or not. Clarissa, I gave you my kidney, I gave you my whole life. And this is how you repay me?" There was a pause. Then her voice came back, harder than steel and colder than winter. "You should be grateful you're even alive, Mother. Without me needing that transplant, what purpose would you have? Who would even think about you? You'd be rotting alone in that house, forgotten by everyone. At least this way you're useful. But don't mistake usefulness for value. You're still worthless. You always have been." The words pierced deeper than the surgeon's scalpel ever had. Each syllable was a blade finding the softest parts of my heart and twisting. "You don't mean that," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "You can't mean that. I have to go. See you in court, Mother." She hung up. I stood in my kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to dead air and feeling my world crumble into dust. For 67 years I'd believed that love, real, unconditional, sacrificial love, would be recognized and returned. I'd believed that motherhood meant something sacred, something that couldn't be broken. But my daughter had just taught me a lesson I'd somehow missed. Some people see love as weakness. Some people see sacrifice as stupidity. And some people will take everything you offer and still call you worthless. That night, I sat in the dark for hours, staring at the scar across my abdomen. The wound had healed on the outside, but inside I felt like I was still bleeding. I thought about Marcus, my late husband, and wondered what he would say if he could see what our daughter had become. Then, somewhere around midnight, something shifted inside me. the grief hardened into something else, something sharper, something that felt suspiciously like anger. For the first time in my life, I decided I would not cry anymore. I would not beg. I would not collapse under the weight of her cruelty. I would fight. The next morning, I woke up with purpose burning in my chest like cold fire. If Clarissa wanted a legal battle, I would give her one. But I wouldn't fight with lawyers I couldn't afford or arguments I didn't understand. I would fight with something more powerful, the truth. I started in my basement where I'd stored boxes of old documents for decades. Most people throw away receipts and bank statements after a few years, but I'd always been meticulous about record keeping, a habit born from poverty, from knowing that every penny mattered and needed to be accounted for. I pulled down box after dusty box, sneezing as I opened them and sorted through years of my life documented in paper. And there it was, all of it, a complete record of everything I'd sacrificed for Clarissa. Rent receipts, $500 per month for 3 full years when she lived in that downtown apartment after college, the one she insisted she needed to be close to her marketing job. Total, $18,000. Tuition payment records, private academy from ages 6 through 18, university tuition for 4 years. I'd taken out personal loans that I was still repaying, even now. Total, $127,000. Medical bills, the $18,000 from Marcus's accident and funeral that I'd paid off over 15 years. Clarissa's childhood braces, $6,000. Her emergency appendectomy at age 16, $4,200. Car payments, I'd co-signed for her first car, then made every single payment when she said she couldn't afford it. Total, $14,000. Wedding costs, I'd contributed $8,500 to her lavish wedding to Preston, money I'd scraped together by selling furniture and taking an extra shift at the mill that nearly destroyed my back. And those were just the big expenses. I had receipts for school supplies, prom dresses, college textbooks, apartment deposits, professional wardrobe items for her first job. Thousands and thousands of dollars poured into a child who now claimed I was mentally incompetent and worthless. But the most important document wasn't in those boxes. It was in my medical records. I called my surgeon's office and requested a complete copy of my kidney donation file. The administrator hesitated, mentioned privacy concerns, but when I explained I needed them for a legal proceeding, she agreed to have them ready for pickup within 48 hours. 2 days later, I held in my hands the official medical documentation of my sacrifice. Pre-surgery evaluations, consent forms I'd signed acknowledging the life-threatening risks, the surgical report describing the nephrectomy procedure, post-operative care instructions, and a letter from the transplant coordinator explicitly stating that I was a living donor who had given my kidney to my daughter, Clarissa Thompson Whitmore. It was all there. Undeniable. Documented in medical and legal terminology that no court could dismiss. I also did something else. I went to my bank and requested printouts of every transaction for the past 30 years, everything I could access. The banker, a woman named Rosa who'd worked at the branch for decades and knew my situation, gave me a sympathetic look. "Mrs. Thompson, this is a lot of paper. Are you sure you need all of this?" "Every page," I said firmly. "I need proof of my entire life." "If you had to prove your worth with receipts and documents, could you? Sometimes the people who gave the most are treated like they gave nothing. Share your thoughts below." It took 3 days to organize everything into a coherent narrative. I created a timeline, matching every sacrifice to a specific date. I made copies of everything, storing the originals in a safe deposit box I'd never told Clarissa about. And then I did something I'd never done before. I hired a lawyer. Not an expensive one. I couldn't afford Bernard in the grey suit prices. But I found a woman named Patricia Morales, who worked out of a modest office above a dry cleaner and had a reputation for taking on cases that bigger firms wouldn't touch. She specialized in elder abuse and exploitation. When I laid out my documents across her cluttered desk, Patricia's eyes widened. "Mrs. Thompson," she said slowly, "this is one of the most comprehensive records of parental sacrifice I've ever seen. And your daughter is trying to declare you incompetent." "Yes," I said. "Can you help me?" She leaned back in her chair, studying me with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Can I help you? Mrs. Thompson, with this evidence, I can destroy her case before the judge even finishes his morning coffee. The question is, are you ready for what comes next? Because once we walk into that courtroom, there's no going back. Your relationship with your daughter will never be the same." I thought about Clarissa's words on the phone. "You're still worthless. You always have been." I met Patricia's gaze without flinching. "There's nothing left to save." "Then let's win this thing," she said, extending her hand. I shook it, feeling strength return to my bones for the first time in months. The day of the hearing arrived like an executioner's appointment. I dressed carefully in a simple grey suit I'd borrowed from Rosa at the bank, something that looked competent and dignified without trying too hard. Patricia had coached me: appear calm, speak clearly, don't let emotion overwhelm the facts. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from television shows. Wood panelling, fluorescent lights, and the lingering smell of old coffee and anxiety. Clarissa sat at the opposing table with Bernard the lawyer, looking polished and confident in an expensive black dress. Preston sat behind her in the gallery, checking his phone with practiced disinterest. She didn't look at me once. Judge Harrison entered, a man in his early 60s with grey hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He settled into his chair with the weariness of someone who'd seen too many family disputes tear people apart. "This is a petition for determination of incapacity," he began, reviewing his notes. "Mrs. Clarissa Thompson Whitmore is petitioning the court to declare her mother, Mrs. Lydia Thompson, mentally incompetent to manage her own affairs. Mrs. Thompson Whitmore, you may present your case." Bernard stood, smooth as oil, and launched into his argument. He painted me as a confused, declining old woman who couldn't manage her own household. He cited my age, my recent surgery, my pain medication use. He claimed I'd forgotten to pay utility bills, a lie, and that neighbours had reported odd behaviour, another lie. He called no witnesses, because there were no witnesses to these fabrications, but he spoke with such confidence that I watched the judge's expression shift toward concern. Then Patricia stood. "Your Honour, may I present evidence before we proceed further?" Judge Harrison nodded. "Go ahead, Ms. Morales." Patricia approached the bench with a folder thick as a dictionary. She began placing documents in front of the judge, one after another, narrating as she went. "Bank statements showing Mrs. Thompson has maintained consistent, careful financial management for 30 years. Every bill paid on time, no overdrafts, no signs of confusion or mismanagement. Medical records from 3 different doctors, all dated within the past 2 months, certifying Mrs. Thompson as mentally competent, cognitively sound, and fully capable of independent living. Letters from neighbours, her pastor, and the manager of her local grocery store, all attesting to her sharp mind and active community involvement." The judge's eyebrows rose as the pile grew. "And finally, Your Honour, a complete financial history of Mrs. Thompson's relationship with her daughter." Patricia spread out my carefully organised receipts and records like a roadmap of sacrifice. She walked the judge through every payment, every loan, every sacrifice I'd made. The numbers were staggering when laid out all at once. $180,700, Patricia said, letting the number hang in the air. "That is the documented amount Mrs. Thompson has spent on her daughter over the past 40 years, not counting countless undocumented expenses. And that doesn't include the most significant sacrifice." She placed the kidney donation file in front of Judge Harrison. 6 months ago, Mrs. Lydia Thompson donated her kidney to save her daughter's life. She underwent dangerous surgery at age 67, knowing she might not survive. The medical team documented that she fully understood the risks and proceeded anyway. "This is not the action of an incompetent woman, Your Honour. This is the action of a selfless mother." The courtroom was completely silent. I watched Clarissa's face drain of colour. Preston finally looked up from his phone. Judge Harrison studied the kidney donation records for a long time. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed completely. "Mrs. Thompson Whitmore," he said, his voice sharp with something that might have been anger or disgust, You donated your kidney to your daughter 6 months ago. Patricia answered, She did, Your Honour. And now, 6 months after receiving this life-saving gift, you're attempting to have your mother declared incompetent and take control of her assets. Bernard tried to intervene. Your Honour, the two matters are unrelated. They are absolutely related. Judge Harrison cut him off. He turned to Clarissa directly. Young lady, did your mother donate her kidney to you? Clarissa opened her mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, Yes. And you believe she's mentally incompetent? She's old. She's not making good decisions. Not making good decisions? The judge's voice rose slightly. The medical records show she passed every cognitive test, every psychiatric evaluation required for organ donation. Do you know how rigorous those screenings are? They specifically test for the exact kind of incapacity you're claiming. Clarissa had no answer. Judge Harrison removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but carried the weight of final judgment. I've been on this bench for 19 years. I've seen children fight over inheritances, siblings destroy each other over property, families tear themselves apart over money. But I have never seen someone try to declare incompetent the parent who literally gave them an organ to save their life. He looked down at my evidence one more time, then directly at me. Mrs. Thompson, how old are you? I stood, my voice steady. 67, Your Honour. And you donated your kidney knowing the risks? I did. Do you know what day it is today? Monday, October 14th. Who is the current president? I answered correctly. He asked me several more questions, simple cognitive tests. I answered every single one without hesitation. Then he turned back to Clarissa, and his expression was one of pure disappointment. Petition denied. Mrs. Lydia Thompson is clearly competent, both mentally and legally. Furthermore, I'm appalled that this petition was filed at all. Mrs. Thompson retains full control of all her assets, medical decisions and legal rights. He banged his gavel once. The sound echoed like thunder. We're adjourned. Mrs. Thompson Whitmore, you should be ashamed of yourself. The courtroom cleared slowly, people filing out with whispers and backward glances. Clarissa stood frozen at her table, Bernard gathering papers frantically beside her. Preston had already slipped out, presumably to avoid the embarrassment. I walked past her without a word, Patricia at my side, but as we reached the courtroom doors I heard Clarissa's voice behind me. Mother, wait. I stopped, turned, looked at my daughter's face and saw something that might have been panic or shame or anger. I couldn't tell anymore and I realised I didn't care. You heard the judge, I said quietly. I'm competent enough to make my own decisions, and I've decided we have nothing more to say to each other. You don't understand, she started, her voice rising. Preston said we needed... This was supposed to be easy, I finished for her. You thought I'd just roll over and let you take everything. You thought wrong. People in the hallway had stopped to watch. Court staff, other families waiting for their hearings, even a local reporter who'd been covering another case. Clarissa noticed the attention and lowered her voice to an angry hiss. You're making a scene. Stop embarrassing me. I laughed then, a sound I barely recognized coming from my own throat. Embarrassing you? Clarissa, you tried to steal my home after I gave you my kidney. I think you've embarrassed yourself. Her face flushed crimson. I gave you life for 18 years. And I gave you life for 34 years and then saved it when it was failing, I interrupted. We're not keeping score, but if we were, you'd lose. Bernard touched Clarissa's arm, probably trying to get her to stop talking, but she shook him off. Fine. You want your house so badly? Keep it. Keep your pathetic little life. But don't come crying to me when you're sick and alone with no one to take care of you. I won't, I said simply, because I already know what it's like to have you in my life, and being alone would be an improvement. Have you ever had to walk away from family for your own survival? Sometimes the hardest thing is realizing blood doesn't mean loyalty. Drop a heart emoji if you understand. The reporter had her phone out now, clearly recording. Clarissa noticed and tried to regain composure, smoothing her dress and straightening her shoulders. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice wavered with uncertainty. "Yes," I replied, "it is." Patricia and I walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunshine that felt like a blessing. Behind us, I heard Clarissa's heels clicking frantically as she tried to escape the building before more people saw her. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done with her yet. We were walking to Patricia's car when I saw Preston's Mercedes in the parking lot. He was standing beside it, phone pressed to his ear, arguing with someone. Clarissa approached him, clearly upset, and reached for his arm. He jerked away from her, said something sharp I couldn't hear, then ended his call and turned to her with barely concealed fury. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" His voice carried across the parking lot. "My business partners will hear about this. Everyone will know my wife tried to rob her own mother." "I was doing this for us," Clarissa protested. "I said we needed her house if we could get it legally and quietly," Preston snapped. "Not this disaster. You've made us look like predators." "But you told me—" "Figure it out," he interrupted, unlocking his car. "I have a meeting. Take an Uber home." He got in and drove away, leaving Clarissa standing alone in the parking lot. For just a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered her words. "You're still worthless. You always have been." Patricia noticed me watching. "You okay?" "I'm perfect," I said, and realized I meant it. 3 days after the court hearing, Clarissa sent me a text message. "I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I deleted it without responding. She called twice. I let it go to voicemail. Her messages rambled with excuses and justifications. Preston had pressured her. She'd been stressed about money. She hadn't meant those things she said. She never once acknowledged what she'd actually done. She only regretted getting caught. I blocked her number. 2 weeks later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I put my house on the market. Not because Clarissa had won, she hadn't. Not because I was running away, I wasn't. But because I realized that house held 40 years of memories that no longer served me. Marcus was gone. Clarissa was gone. And I was still here, alive, with years left and no reason to spend them haunting a place filled with ghosts. The house sold within 3 weeks to a young family with 2 small children. The mother reminded me of myself at that age, tired but hopeful, working hard to build something good. I sold it to them below market value, and when they asked why, I said, "Because you'll fill it with love. That's worth more than money." With the proceeds, I did something I'd never done in my entire life. I made a choice purely for myself. I moved to a small coastal town called Maplewood, 3 hours north. I'd visited once on a day trip decades ago, and never forgotten the way the sea air filled my lungs with something that felt like possibility. I rented a tiny cottage with blue shutters and a front porch that faced the ocean. The rent was cheap because it was off-season, and the landlord, a woman in her 70s named Dolores, took one look at me and said, "You look like you need a fresh start." "I do," I admitted. "Then welcome home," she said, handing me the keys. Life in Maplewood was simple in the best way. I woke up to the sound of waves instead of traffic. I walked the beach every morning, watching seabirds dive for fish and couples stroll hand in hand. My body still ached from the surgery sometimes, but the pain felt different here. Manageable, temporary, a reminder that I'd survived. I joined a book club at the local library, a group of 8 women ranging from their 50s to their 80s. They called themselves the Chapter Changers, and they met every Thursday evening to discuss novels and drink wine that came from boxes but tasted like friendship. The first meeting I attended, the host, a retired teacher named Vivian, went around the circle asking everyone to share one thing they'd overcome. When my turn came, I hesitated. Then I decided that hiding my story served no one. "I gave my kidney to my daughter," I said quietly, "and she tried to steal my house and have me declared incompetent 6 months later." The room went completely silent. Then Vivian reached across the coffee table and took my hand. "Welcome to the Survivors Club," she said. "Half of us have children who don't call. The other half wish theirs wouldn't." Everyone laughed, the kind of laughter that comes from shared pain and the realization that you're not alone. They shared their stories too. Sons who stole inheritance, daughters who disappeared after the money ran out, children who only called when they needed something. We were all mothers who'd given everything and received back betrayal, neglect, or indifference. But we were also survivors, rebuilding ourselves piece by piece. For the first time in decades, I lived for myself, not as a provider, not as a sacrifice, not as someone's worthless mother, simply as Lydia, a woman who'd been broken and rebuilt herself stronger. 6 months into my new life, I received a package. It arrived on a Tuesday, addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a framed photo of Clarissa and Preston, both smiling artificially, and a letter written on expensive stationery. The letter was from Preston's mother, a woman I'd met exactly once at the wedding. She wrote, "Dear Lydia, I recently learned what my son and your daughter attempted to do to you. I want you to know that I am appalled and ashamed. I raised Preston to be better than this. Clarissa has been a poor influence on him, encouraging his worst impulses. They are currently separated and discussing divorce. Preston has moved back home temporarily to reassess his priorities." His words. "I hope you are well. You deserve peace. Sincerely, Margaret Whitmore." I read the letter twice, then put it in a drawer. Their marriage falling apart gave me no satisfaction. I'd stopped caring about Clarissa's life the moment she'd called me worthless. But the letter did confirm something I'd suspected. Preston had been the primary driver of the house scheme, and Clarissa had gone along with it. Not that it mattered. She'd still said the words. She'd still filed the papers. She'd still chosen greed over love. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and pink. Dolores wandered over from her cottage next door, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. "You look thoughtful," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "Just remembering," I said. "The daughter." I'd told Dolores my story over tea one afternoon. She'd listened without judgment, then said, "Some people are born takers. They'll drain you dry and still complain you didn't give enough." "Yeah," I said now. "But I'm not angry anymore. I think I've finally let it go." Dolores sipped her lemonade and nodded thoughtfully. "Letting go doesn't mean what happened was okay. It just means you're not carrying it anymore." "Exactly," I agreed. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the waves roll in and out with their eternal, indifferent rhythm. The ocean didn't care about my betrayal or my pain. It just kept moving, kept breathing, kept existing. There was something deeply comforting in that. A month later, I started volunteering at the Maplewood Senior Centre 3 days a week. I'd noticed during my book club meetings that several women mentioned feeling isolated, forgotten by their families, unsure of their purpose now that their children were grown and gone. I understood that feeling intimately, so I started a support group. We called it Reclaiming You, a space for older women to talk about the sacrifices they'd made, the disappointments they'd endured, and the lives they were rebuilding. No judgment, no platitudes. Just honest conversation and mutual support. The first meeting, only 4 women showed up. By the 3rd month, we had 23 regular members. We met every Tuesday evening in the community room, and the conversations ranged from heartbreaking to hilarious. There was Margaret, 73, whose son had emptied her savings account to fund his gambling addiction. There was Hui, 68, whose daughter hadn't spoken to her in 5 years after Hui refused to babysit full-time for free. There was Antoinette, 81, whose entire family had stopped visiting after she remarried following her husband's death. They were angry she'd betrayed their father by finding love again. Each story was different, each betrayal unique. But the core wound was the same. They'd given everything, and it hadn't been enough. Or worse, it had been taken for granted. "I used to think something was wrong with me," Margaret said during one meeting. "Like I'd failed as a mother because my son turned out this way." "Me too," Hui admitted. "I kept asking myself what I did wrong." I leaned forward in my chair. "Can I tell you all something I learned? Sometimes you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes you gave your absolute best and the person receiving it simply wasn't capable of appreciating it. That's not your failure. That's theirs." Antoinette wiped tears from her eyes. I needed to hear that. I've been carrying guilt for 3 years, thinking I should have sacrificed my happiness to make them comfortable. "Your happiness matters," I said firmly. "In fact, it might be the only thing that really matters now. We've spent decades, literally decades, putting everyone else first. What if we spent our remaining years putting ourselves first? Not in a selfish way, but in a we deserve to exist as full people way." The room erupted in agreement. Women nodded, some cried, others laughed with the relief of finally being understood. That night, walking home along the beach under a sky full of stars, I realized something profound. My daughter's betrayal had destroyed me. But from that destruction, I'd built something new. Something that helped others. Something that gave my pain purpose. I would never thank Clarissa for what she did, but I could acknowledge that her cruelty had inadvertently set me free. It was a Saturday morning in early spring, almost a full year after the court hearing, when I heard a knock on my cottage door. I was in my kitchen making tea, wearing a comfortable old sweater and no makeup, hair pulled back in a simple bun. The knock was hesitant, almost apologetic. I opened the door and froze. Clarissa stood on my porch. She looked different, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes and none of the polished perfection I'd grown accustomed to. She wore jeans and a plain jacket, her hair in a ponytail. No designer clothes, no jewellery except her wedding ring, which I noticed was missing. "Mother," she said, her voice cracking on the word. I didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at this stranger who used to be my daughter and waited. Can we talk?" she asked. "Please." Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door, to protect myself from whatever new manipulation this might be. But curiosity, or maybe the last stubborn thread of mother love I couldn't quite cut, made me step aside. "5 minutes," I said. "That's all you get." She walked in, looking around the small cottage with something that might have been surprise or envy. "It's nice here. Cozy." I didn't offer her tea or a seat. I crossed my arms and waited. Clarissa took a shaky breath. "Preston and I are divorced. It was finalised last month." "I know," I said. Margaret had written me another letter with that news. He wasn't who I thought he was. The marriage was falling apart even before the court thing. He'd been pressuring me about money, about assets, about securing our future. He saw you as an obstacle. And her voice broke. "I let him convince me that taking your house was practical. Smart, even. I let him turn me into someone I don't recognise." I remained silent. This wasn't enough. Not even close. "I've been in therapy," she continued, 3 times a week for 6 months. "My therapist asked me to write down everything you sacrificed for me. I filled 11 pages. 11 pages of things I'd taken for granted or forgotten completely." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket with trembling hands. "I brought it. I thought maybe if you saw that, I finally understand." "I don't need to see it," I interrupted. "I lived it, Clarissa. I don't need a list to remember giving you my entire life." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know. God, I know. And I can't take back what I said or what I did. I called you worthless. I tried to steal your home after you saved my life. There's no apology big enough for that." "No," I agreed quietly. "There isn't. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. And I know I have no right to ask, but is there any way you could ever forgive me?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw genuine remorse in her eyes. Saw the brokenness that comes from facing your own cruelty and hating what you see. Part of me, the mother part that had nursed her through fevers and held her through nightmares, wanted to forgive her immediately, wanted to wrap her in my arms and say it was all okay. But it wasn't okay. And I'd learned that loving someone didn't mean accepting their abuse. "Clarissa," I said slowly, "I spent 67 years believing that if I loved you hard enough, sacrificed enough, gave enough, you would eventually see my worth. But you taught me something important. I don't need you to see my worth. I know my worth, and it's not measured by whether my daughter loves me back." "I do love you," she sobbed. "I know I showed it in the worst possible way, but I do." "Maybe you do," I interrupted gently. "But your love came with conditions and cruelty. It came with humiliation and betrayal. And I've built a life now where I don't accept that kind of love anymore. Not from anyone." She crumpled into herself, sinking onto my couch uninvited, crying into her hands. "So that's it? We're just done?" I sat down across from her, maintaining distance. "I don't know what we are. I know I'm not ready to have you in my life. Maybe someday I will be, or maybe not. But right now, I need to protect the peace I've built. And you need to figure out who you are without someone else telling you." "I've lost everything," she whispered. "Preston, the house, my friends. They were all his friends, it turned out. I'm living in a studio apartment and working retail because I can't find anything in my field. I have nothing." For just a moment I felt the old instinct to fix it, to offer money, advice, a place to stay. Then I remembered her standing in my kitchen with a lawyer, threatening to declare me incompetent. "You have your life," I said. "You have both your kidneys and your health. You have the ability to rebuild. That's more than a lot of people get." She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "That's more than you got from me." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." The silence stretched between us like an ocean, vast, deep, impossible to cross quickly. Finally, Clarissa stood. "Thank you for hearing me out. I know I didn't deserve even that." She walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. This life you've built, the woman you've become. You're stronger than I ever realized." "I always was," I said quietly. "You just never looked close enough to see it." She nodded, tears streaming silently now, and left. I watched through my window as she walked to a 10-year-old sedan, nothing like the Mercedes she'd driven before. She sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, head bowed, before finally starting the engine and driving away. I made myself a fresh cup of tea and sat on my porch, watching the waves and feeling complicated. Not forgiveness, exactly, not reconciliation, but maybe the smallest seed of possibility that someday, years from now, we might find some version of a relationship that didn't require me to diminish myself. Or maybe not. And I was okay with that too. That night at book club, I told the chapter changers about Clarissa's visit. They listened intently, passing around wine and tissues as I recounted the conversation. "So what are you going to do?" Vivian asked when I finished. "Nothing," I said. "I'm going to keep living my life. If she's serious about changing, she'll prove it through actions over time, not words in one conversation. And if she's not, I'm protected either way." "That's wise," Hui said. "My daughter apologized too once. 2 weeks later, she was asking me to co-sign a loan." Margaret laughed bitterly. "Mine sent me a Hallmark card that said sorry, and somehow thought that erased stealing $40,000. "The thing is," I said thoughtfully, "I think Clarissa was sincere. I think she really is sorry. But sorry doesn't undo damage. Sorry doesn't give me back the years I spent believing I was worthless because she said I was. Sorry is just the starting point, not the destination." Antoinette raised her glass. "To protecting our peace, even when it costs us relationships." We all clinked glasses and drank. Later, as I walked home under the stars, Dolores caught up with me. "That took strength," she said, not slamming the door but also not throwing it wide open. "It was the hardest thing I've done," I admitted. Part of me wanted to just forgive her and go back to being her mother. But I like the woman I've become without her in my life. I like waking up without anxiety. I like making choices based on what I want, not what someone else needs from me. I like being Lydia, not just Clarissa's mother." Dolores smiled. "Then you've already won." Over the following months, Clarissa sent occasional texts, nothing demanding or manipulative, just small updates. "Started a new job today, nervous but hopeful. Saw a cardinal and thought of you. I remember you said Dad loved cardinals. 3 months sober from wine. Didn't realise I'd been using it to cope." I read them but rarely responded. Once in a while I'd send back a simple, "good to hear," or "proud of you." But I kept the boundary firm. She was working on herself, and I was continuing to work on myself. Maybe someday those paths would intersect in a healthy way, or maybe they wouldn't. And I'd finally learned that my value as a person, as a mother, as a human being, wasn't determined by whether my daughter and I had a relationship. I'd given her life twice, once at birth, once with my kidney. I'd given her everything I had for 34 years. I'd done my job. The rest was up to her. A year and a half after moving to Maplewood, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I wrote a book. It wasn't polished or professional, just a simple memoir of my journey from sacrificial mother to independent woman. I called it The Kidney, the Courthouse, and the Cottage by the Sea. I self-published it through an online platform, expecting maybe my book club friends would read it. Instead, something unexpected happened. It started selling. First dozens of copies, then hundreds, then thousands. Women across the country, across the world wrote to me. They shared their stories of ungrateful children, of sacrifices that went unrecognized, of betrayals that cut deeper than any physical wound. They thanked me for putting into words what they'd felt but couldn't express. "You made me feel less alone," one woman wrote. "You gave me permission to choose myself," wrote another. "I donated a kidney to my son 3 years ago. Last month he sued me for his inheritance early. Your story helped me realize I'm not crazy for feeling devastated." The messages poured in, and I realized my pain had purpose beyond just helping the women in my small support group. It was helping mothers everywhere who'd been taught that self-sacrifice was the highest form of love, even when it destroyed them. I started a podcast called Reclaiming You, where I interviewed women about their journeys from self-sacrifice to self-preservation. The stories were heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. We talked about setting boundaries with adult children, about redefining what family means, about building identity beyond motherhood. The podcast grew. The book sold more copies. I was invited to speak at conferences about elder advocacy and family dynamics. Me, Lydia Thompson, a retired textile worker with a scar across her abdomen and a story of betrayal. But I'd turned that betrayal into something that mattered. One evening, during a particularly powerful podcast interview, my guest, a woman named Teresa who'd been financially exploited by her son, said something that struck me deeply. "I used to think a good mother sacrificed everything. Now I know a good mother teaches her children that all people, including mothers, deserve dignity and respect. I failed my son by teaching him I was worthless, and that's the one thing I truly regret." Her words echoed in my mind for days. Had I taught Clarissa I was worthless by accepting so little in return for so much? Had my endless self-sacrifice actually damaged her ability to value others? I didn't have an answer, but I knew this. I would never make that mistake again. And if Clarissa had children someday, I hoped she would teach them differently. What's the most important lesson you've learned about self-worth? Share it below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. It's been 2 years since I moved to Maplewood, 2 years since the courthouse, 2 years since I chose myself. Clarissa and I have what I call a cordial distance. We text occasionally. She sends me birthday cards. Last Christmas, she sent a small gift, a first edition of a book I'd mentioned loving as a child. It must have cost her significant money, which she doesn't have much of. The gesture touched me. We've met for coffee twice in neutral locations. The conversations are careful, surface level, but not unkind. She's been in therapy for over 2 years now and has done real work on herself. She sponsors other women in recovery and volunteers at a women's shelter. She's building a life based on helping others rather than using them. I'm proud of her for that. But I'm also clear that our relationship will never be what it was, and that's okay. We're building something new, something based on mutual respect rather than obligation. It's smaller, more fragile, but maybe more honest. I'm 70 now. My body moves slower than it used to, and some mornings my scar aches with memory. But I'm happier than I've ever been. My cottage is filled with books and seashells and photographs of my book club friends. My calendar is full of podcast interviews, support group meetings, and beach walks with Dolores. I've learned to measure my worth by how I treat myself, not by how others treat me. I've learned that loving someone doesn't mean accepting their abuse. I've learned that sacrifice without appreciation isn't noble, it's just sad. And I've learned that it's never too late to reclaim your life. Last week, a young woman approached me after a conference talk. She was maybe 30, tears streaming down her face. "My mother is like you," she said. "She's given me everything, and I've taken it all for granted. I've been cruel to her. I don't know if it's too late to fix it." I took her hands in mine. "It's not too late if you're willing to do the work. Real work, not just apologies. But you need to know that she doesn't owe you forgiveness. She doesn't owe you a relationship. If she chooses to rebuild with you, treat it like the precious gift it is." The woman nodded, wiping her eyes. "Will you tell me how?" And so I did, because that's what I do now. I help people understand that mothers are human beings with value beyond their utility. I help daughters understand that taking someone for granted is a choice, and I help women like me understand that we are not worthless. We never were. My name is Lydia Thompson. I'm 70 years old. I gave my daughter my kidney, and she called me worthless. But I proved her wrong, not by forcing her to see my value, but by finally seeing it myself. And now I help other women see theirs too. A mother's worth is not measured by her child's gratitude, but by her own strength to stand tall when betrayed. True love requires boundaries, and sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to accept less than you deserve. Sacrifice without respect isn't noble, it's self-destruction. And you are never too old, never too broken, never too far gone to reclaim your life and rebuild your worth. Your value exists independent of anyone's recognition. You are enough, exactly as you are, with or without their approval. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Lydia's situation? Would you have fought back or walked away? Your perspective matters. Let's talk about it below.